Hi, Mom. I'm going to read you my speech, which is a Torah portion that you won't be able to see in person, so I'm going to read it for you now on video. And this is for August 3rd, 2013. And it is the Torah portion of Re'eh, which is about God's commandment of Shemitah, which means the laws of remission, which means remitting debts to the poor, giving charity to the poor. In this week's Parsha of Re'eh, from the book of Deuteronomy, we read about God's commandment of Shemitah. The Torah commands that every seventh year you shall practice Shemitah in 3 different ways. Specifically, Jews are to refrain from cultivating their land, to practice the remission of debts, and to set free their slaves. So the question for us today in a modern society, where very few of us are farmers and are not slaveholders, is what should this mean to us? This commandment of Shemitah was first given to the Israelites by God through Moses, but in the time of the Second Temple, these periods occurred in regulated cycles in which the Shemitah year was proclaimed by the temple. This all originated with the laws of terumot, which means the donation of crops, during the first 6 years of the cycle. In the 7th year, it is forbidden to plant crops, and the needy can enter the field and take what is grown naturally without cultivation. Acts of charity are among the most fundamental mitzvot that Jews are obligated to perform in accordance with the teachings of the Torah. And rabbinic interpretation suggests that the practice of remitting debts became a more practical way to give charity. Interestingly, different forms of these agricultural mandates still exist in Israel as they apply to the kibbutzim today. Today, it may be difficult to understand a commandment to set our slaves free. Certainly no one should even have slaves. But let's put this commandment in the context of a very ancient and different society, where a person of poverty, without any other means of self-support, may have needed to avail him or herself to a form of forced servitude in order to survive. Under these circumstances, God wants us to act compassionately by freeing them after the debt is paid. Shemitah also commands in every 7th year the remission of all debts owed to Israelites by their own kinsmen. At face value, this commandment appears to be a classic act of charity. That is, there are always people in our society who are less fortunate than others, and as such, it is incumbent upon the more affluent in society to act generously out of compassion, a fundamental Jewish value. Among God's many commandments to Israel, this particular decree is an important code of conduct intended by God for the benefit of society and with far-reaching effects. Even if a debtor insists upon repaying the loan after the Shemitah year, the creditor must insist that the debt is canceled. However, it should be noted from rabbinic interpretations of this commandment that there may be extenuating circumstances that would allow for certain loans to be collected. For example, the paying of workers or servants, or collecting money for goods purchased on credit when an agreement exists to make payment after the Shemitah year or the sabbatical year. The essence of this Torah parsha is that we are essentially promised by God in verse 15:4 that there will be no needy among you. The text is quite clear in identifying the blessings that the Israelites will receive for heeding this commandment. As stated in 15:6, "For the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised you. You will extend loans to many nations, but will require none for yourself. You will dominate many nations, but they will not dominate you." This is quite a bold promise to the Israelites. But isn't poverty simply a fundamental part of the human condition? In fact, just 3 verses later, in 15:7, it states, "If, however, there is a needy person among you, one of your own kinsmen, in any of your settlements in the land that the Lord is giving to you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinsman." So why is there an apparent contradiction between verses 15:4 and 15:7? Does poverty exist or not? Actually, there is no contradiction, but a very clear condition that accompanies the Lord's promise that there will be no needy among the house of Israel, as stated in the very next verse. If only you heed the Lord your God and take care to keep all this instruction that I enjoin upon you this day. Thus, it would seem that God realizes the tendency of his people at times to be selfish and of hardened heart, and that will be an ongoing struggle. So what does this mean to us today? By embracing God's commandment of Shemitah, we would gain perspective of others. We would feel compassion to those less fortunate, and in the process become less concerned with our own indulgences and consumption. And even if we lack the resources to lend money, we always have the option of volunteering our talents and efforts to worthwhile community projects. No one person can eradicate poverty, but by acting responsibly and ethically, we serve as good examples to others, and we generate a social momentum for additional mitzvot to be performed on a larger scale. In the days of Hillel, it became a concern among the community of Israel that the affluent would intentionally avoid lending money, especially when the Shemitah year was approaching. Despite the Torah's warning in verse 15:9, beware lest you harbor the base thought, the seventh year, the year of remission is approaching, so that you are mean to your kinsman and give him nothing. He will cry out to the Lord against you, and you will incur guilt. Now here's where it gets a little technical, so please bear with me. To address this concern, Hillel created the concept of a Beit Din, which means a rabbinical court, established to act as agents for the lender in order to collect money. The technicality lies in the Torah's text, which refers specifically to a lender and his kinsman. Since a Beit Din is a public body, the exclusion of collecting the debt in the Shemitah year didn't apply. The mechanism that the Beit Din used was known as a prosbul, which is a written agreement invoked by the Beit Din, the rabbinic board, on behalf of the lender. Well, now, while this may seem to be a sneaky way to avoid the Shemitah commandment, it's interesting that the word prosbul is really a Hebrew contraction for the words that